10 years after the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, there have been some favorable developments, like there are governments who have integrated the UN Declaration as part of their constitution, like Bolivia, Ecuador, and there are some court decisions made by the Inter-American Court on Human Rights as well as other courts which have ruled in favor of indigenous peoples using the UN Declaration as the basis for their decisions. However, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done because violations of indigenous people's rights still continue, especially when they are resisting against projects like extractive industries, expansion of agricultural lands, which are encroaching on indigenous people's lands. And there are many cases of indigenous peoples being criminalized, displaced because of these kinds of developments. There are also still cases of indigenous peoples who have been displaced because of the creation of conservation areas or national parks. The governments have to take this seriously because in the end, if there are conflicts that happen, it will be more costly for the companies as well as for the government and the indigenous peoples, because they will continue resisting, they will continue asserting their rights, and then in some countries I've seen the governments will bring in the military to quell the struggle of the indigenous people, and then additional human rights violations take place. So I think we don't like to see a situation like that, and that's precisely why we are calling for the implementation of the UN Declaration, which has 6 articles on free, prior, informed consent. The declaration, it's an instrument that's meant to be fully implemented so that reconciliation can happen between indigenous peoples and states. Indigenous peoples have long been suffering from injustices, from historical injustices. Cases of ethnocide has been done against them, and there needs to be a lot of redress, for these injustices. The state should really respect the rights of indigenous peoples to be consulted and to have their free, prior, informed consent obtained whenever any development project is brought to their communities. I think that's the basic human right that indigenous peoples have.